People who got sentenced to jail in the 90s or 2000s and got released this year, what does it feel like being in today's 2018? What shocked you the most? My Sally was locked up for 20 years before he was in jail with me. He got locked up again for beating up somebody who was talking at a bus station. The guy he beat up was talking to someone else on a Bluetooth headset. About 10 years ago I was unemployed and went to one of these employment centers looking for a job for the first time in a long time, which ended up basically being a sort of internet cafe where you use the computers to job search, create resumes, etc. I sat down by an older gentleman who just stared into the screen with his hands in his lap. An employee came by and asked him if he needed help, which he agreed and stated he had been incarcerated for like 30 years and had never used a computer. She sat down and told him to use a mouse to move the cursor to an icon, etc, etc. This dude gave the mouse a sharp jab with his finger, like he was pushing an elevator button, that slid the mouse across the mouse pad and onto the table. The look on the lady's face was priceless when she realized she had to teach this guy how to use a computer from ground king zero. She was puzzled where to even begin. My dad is a prison chaplain. One of his inmates had been in for about 30 years and got out last year. My dad got a call from him a few days later. "Chap, did you know they have toilets that flush themselves?" I was told a story by this ex-felon who had a cellmate that finally got released after 30 plus years in prison. He gave the guy his phone number because he knew that transitioning into the real world would be rough. He went on to say that he got a call from his cellmate at a grocery store in a corner crying because the selection in the store was too much for him to handle. Mostly the different varieties of items different brands have grown in the past 30 plus years. Also, the use of self-checkout machines can be confusing. Saw a dude on the news who'd been in jail for like 50 or 60 years. He said the craziest thing was seeing all the crazy colored Gatorades. That and he thought everyone was an FBI agent because of their earbuds. I remember working at McDonald's and having an ex-convict come in and being outraged at the prices. A Big Mac was twice the price he was used to. Not a felon, but I did have a lengthy phone call with an ex-con at work once where I went in circles trying to explain the concept of attachments to emails. I also had to explain that fax and email were separate things. I worked with a lot of felons. One guy had been in prison for 38 years. He said everything is different. The cars are so different and quiet. Everyone is on their phones. The phones are weird. People have phones in their pockets. I went to rehab a few years ago, and one of the guys there with me just got out of prison after a 20-year sentence for being a huge meth dealer. He said cell phones blew his mind and he's so confused about gas pumps now because of the option to pay with cards at the pump and how different they look. I knew a guy who was in for around 15 years. I told him I like games, and he was asking if I had a chance to play this or that game on PS2. I said I didn't, and he said I should get it. They weren't classics or anything but sports games that came out at the time. In like 2015 I met a guy who went to jail in 1997 and had just got out. The big thing he noticed was that there weren't as many large groups of youth out and about like when he was a kid. He said the saddest thing he saw was going to the local park and seeing almost nobody there at 6 PM. When he went in the 1990s there were typically 50 to 60 young people hanging out, skating around and socializing. He said people aren't out on their stoops socializing as much. He doesn't see nearly as many people out and about on Friday and Saturday nights. I suppose the way we socialize has changed so much since then. Back then the only way you could socialize was by leaving your house and hanging out with friends. Even doing nothing with friends was preferable to just hanging out inside. Today people don't do that as much. I was in for 3 days back in '99. Last meal before I went in, McRib. Got out, McRib was gone. I keep picturing the scene from Shawshank Redemption, where Brooks is released from prison after decades of incarceration. The world has changed so much that he's overwhelmed and doesn't last long on the outside. I can't imagine how hard it must be to acclimate if you don't have good support. A friend of my dad's just got released a while back. He was in for about 8 years, and the other day he was talking to my dad about how vaping is so healthy for you, and he has individual ringtones for each of his contacts. He's hilarious, but we don't mention anything about how behind he is. It's not as extreme an amount of time as others, but you can tell he's still adapting. Yay, they probably don't know what Reddit is. My best friend got out in January after 12 years. He can't handle the awesomeness of Netflix. Also booking online. I still teaching him Amazon. Oh, and you pick your seat at the movie theater. I'm not really over that yet either. Last thing, cutie oranges. Edit, thought of another. He loves that YouTube now has a video for everything. Want to fix your golf swing? There is video. Want to properly cut up a papaya or tie a certain kind of fly fishing lure? Video. Making a throwaway for obvious reasons. Went to jail in 1995. Came out in 2013. Obviously smartphones and whatnot have been a big difference. But the biggest difference to me is simply that I rarely see kids outside. Anyone who remembers the 80s and 90s remembers that past 5 p.m. there were groups of youth aging 16 to 28 literally roaming everywhere. I mean just huge groups of youth standing around at corners drinking and smoking. The parks were filled with them doing drugs and whatnot. After 9 p.m. blocks were basically overrun with youth. Parties were everywhere. Even the losers had zero trouble finding some crazy party to go to. I've been out for a while and traveled all over the states. The one universal change I will say is that I rarely see that kind of youth culture anymore. I'm not sure if there are just 3/4 less kids or if the kids are just all inside now. Youth culture used to be in your face constantly. People used to stand on the street corners with boomboxes and have breakdance competitions with plenty of drugs passed around. I haven't seen anything even remotely similar to that. Another thing is crime. Crime used to be everywhere. Even normal, well-to-do people know about and were often even slightly engaged in some form of crime. They often had siblings that were into crime or knew neighbors who were into it. If you ever wanted anything extra done that was illegal, there was always guys you could go to. There was your normal life, then there was your sort of underground life. Almost everyone had one or knew plenty of people that were into it. I remember as a youth me and my friends used to sell Lucy cigarettes and transport stolen goods from store to store for this seedy Italian guy on our block. In my early 20s we used to help find guys to pay off landlords to let us throw parties on their rooftops. Everyone did this sort of stuff. That was considered kind of normal youth stuff back then. Today that would seem like something only a serious criminal would do. Even our parents had their dealings with shady characters. Those are really the two biggest changes I've noticed. Not prison, but I recently met a woman who entered a cloistered convent in the late 2000s and discerned out about 7 years later. They were allowed to have visitors and could write letters, but couldn't leave other than to go to the doctor and such, and she didn't have any contact with technology. She said the biggest change she noticed after coming back to society at large was how prevalent smartphones were and their impact on society. She said that she remembered the first iPhone being out before she entered, but smartphones still seemed like a novelty. She had seen visitors with them in the time she was in the convent, but didn't realize how prevalent they were. She said that it was weird that in less than 10 years they went from a novelty to incredibly prevalent, and almost an expectation for you to have one to be a normal part of society. She noticed a big change in people's behaviors and how they interact with one another, most prominently having shorter attention spans and seeming distant even when in the same room. She said she had to learn the lingo around smartphones too. For example, she didn't know what app meant at first. The other thing that she said came to mind was changes in language. The two biggest things she pointed out was people saying that something was a thing and how much more commonly people said stuff like "I got this" or "I got you." The world went and got itself in a big damn hurry. I was an angry youth, ended up with the wrong people, and became an antisocial and empathic. Got sent to rehabilitation after beating a guy completely senseless in 2005. The rehab center decided I was a lost cause and to keep me away from society until I was no longer a threat. I went in believing the world was a dark place, reinforced by my own shady actions, that humans are inherently bad. I expected no change in myself and didn't mind dying at any time. 10 years later, and a ton of counseling, therapy, and genuine personality change, and I felt ready to leave and see the world again. It was odd. When I went in, I saw something bad lurking inside every human I met. I was distrustful, and felt like I could see into their dark soul. When I got out, that had changed. A smile seemed genuine, and made me happy. A person being courteous and just greeting me with a smile, made me feel some love for them. The world seemed bright and my optimism, and love felt untouchable. As for technology, the weirdest part to adjust to wasn't necessarily smartphones but everything. All technology had improved to the point where nothing could surprise me. When I bought a pack of batteries, I remember thinking, I bet these last 10 times longer now. Boy, was I wrong. I wasn't in prison, but enlisted into the military in early 9, and did most my training here in the States for that year, so I wasn't completely out of the loop. But after finishing boot camp and training for my job in 9, I was stationed overseas for 2 years. Upon arrival to my new duty station, I got an iPhone 3Gs, but quickly lost it within a month and never bothered getting another one. On base, the internet was practically 56k modem speeds for whatever reason. I think it was due to insufficient infrastructure to provide service to so many people. So my internet usage was limited because of slow speeds and limited free time from work. I remembered Christmas/New Year's of 2010. Command didn't approve leave for us to go home so that we would be ready to deploy if necessary. Everyone ended up getting all boozed up at the barracks, and I mostly spent my time playing my PS3 offline because of the aforementioned internet. So basically from 2009 through 2011, during the rise of online video streaming services and smartphones, I missed out on all of that. It wasn't prison or anything, so I was aware, but didn't experience any of it firsthand. Coming back to the States the beginning of 2012 was like traveling a couple of years into the future. Netflix used to arrive by mail, but all of a sudden, the fact that I could access any show I want all from a single website blew my mind. In the span of the 2 to 3 years, internet speeds increased exponentially for the same cost. Didn't help that I spent that whole time with archaic internet while on base. In 9 I had a PSP for portable gaming, and had to lug around multiple UMDs. Now I can just go to the App Store and download from a plethora of mobile apps on my smartphone, all at 4G speeds. So while it wasn't as drastic as being in prison from the early 2000s until 2018, even those couple of years in the early 2010s, where I was away, was pretty crazy when I returned. I can only imagine what it'd be like for anyone locked away for 5, 10, 20 or more years. I was in prison from 2003 to 2011. Wasn't really surprised by much of anything. Inside, we watched television every day and the commercials prepared me for the technology. I had the New York Times delivered to my cell/cube daily. We had radios, news, BBC, NPR, etc. Smartphones really weren't that difficult to grasp. I came of age during the early internet era, and so smartphones were just mini computers with touch screens. If anything, technology was more user-friendly than it had been before I went away. You see, it's not the technology that's difficult to adapt to, it's the people. There is a prison culture, and once you adapt to it, you learn to respect and even appreciate it. You see the same people every day, and it's a tense, testosterone-driven environment. Negotiating the unspoken rules means understanding the importance of showing respect without showing fear, and the only way to do that honestly is to get in touch with yourself, to overcome your insecurities, to quiet your righteous anger, to develop a sense of when it's time to move out of the way, and when it's time to stand your ground. This culture forces you to become a man among men. Coming home to a society of selfish, arrogant, disrespectful, self-assured adult children who glorify their minor struggles on social media and perpetuate this culture of self-identified victimization was, and continues to be, difficult. In prison, not only will you not be celebrated for your so-called courage in aggrandizing your victimization, you'll be mocked for not handling the problem like a man. Out here it seems almost a contest as to who can cry the loudest and blame the most. In my personal life, the same people crying wolf and routinely shifting blame are the ones who dismiss me as a human being because of my prison experience. Ironically, my prison experience is the same reason I dismiss them. And so I feel a chasm has grown between the man I became in prison and the culture I came home to as a 32-year-old adult. And every time I sense someone of relevance in my life dismiss my opinion, subtly condescend to me, gossip about me just out of earshot, etc., I feel that chasm grow.